Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is I, your pal on wheels, Corey Hot Wheels, coming at you for another video. And as promised, I am going to be talking about TWA Untamed today. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first match of the evening was a submission match between newly crowned TWA champion Zayden Kane versus Connor Cross in a highly anticipated rematch. Connor Cross laid out the challenge to Zayden Kane on social media, which was accepted by Zayden Kane. And, right out of the starting gate, Zayden came out and quickly was just laying it down on Connor Cross. And these two guys battled back and forth for a while, and, we're trying to lock in, excuse me, and, submission holds to make the other guy submit. And, I actually talked to Connor before the show, and I said, hey, Connor, since you're from Canada, you should lock in the sharpshooter. And he did lock in the sharpshooter on Zayden Kane, but, Zayden was able to get to the ropes to break the hold. Eventually, Zayden locked in that devastating Fujiwara armbar, the same submission that he made Connor Cross tap out with to win the TWA title. And Zayden locked in that hold really deep, and Connor, submitted to the Fujiwara armbar. After the match, Connor came back in the ring, and, we thought for a minute that, Connor wanted some more of Zayden Kane, and, eventually Connor just extended his hand, and, and Zayden asked the crowd, should I shake his hand? And, the crowd said yes, because, Connor was on Facebook, apologizing to the fans, for everything he's done. And, we were thinking he was, turning over a new leaf. And, they shook hands, they hugged it out, and, they were raising each other's hands in the ring. And then Connor, it was too good to be true. He kicked Zayden below the belt and, assaulted Zayden with a chair, and then eventually delivered a devastating choke slam onto a steel chair to Zayden Kane. And, I talked to Zayden a little bit, and I said, so could we, expect a part 3 between you and Connor Cross? And he said, definitely. So, I'm sure Zayden is going to be out for blood, at the next show. So, we'll be definitely looking forward to that as fans for sure. Then the next match was a tornado tag match, which means like both teams were in the ring at the same time. There was no disqualification. And it was supposed to be the Pattersons defending the TWA tag team titles against the Miami Mental Institution. And, the Miami Mental Institution, they were not able to make it to the show. So then the Alpha Bros came out and wanted another shot at the tag titles. And then Vane Lewis, TWA commissioner, came out and said, no, like, you guys already had your rematch and you lost. And then Timmy Patterson grabbed the mic and said, hey, like, we'll fight him again. Like, we don't care. And then, the crowd wanted another match, so Vane Lewis granted the match. And, and the Alpha Bros, were pulling all their dirty tricks and, making Mama Patterson even more angry, which I said in the last video, that's not a woman you want to make angry, boys, but it seems like they don't care. And, and then they delivered a devastating stomp onto Stacy Lynn Patterson's arm, and, She said today that she suffered a grade 2 MCL tear. So, she'll be out of action for a while because of that attack. And then, the pattern, and then, you know, Colton Frost and Elliott Lee were able to double team Timmy Patterson for the win. And then Timmy tried to get up and lay out the Alpha Bros, but eventually the 2-on-1 game just was too much for Timmy to overcome, and they laid him out with one of the tag title belts. And, and Mama Patterson, she was just irate. I mean, and the Alpha Bros, they were still taunting her, and I'm just sitting there and I'm like, boys, she's going to get up and she's going to beat you. I mean, like I said, that's not a woman you want to tick off. And then we had a 2 out of 3 falls match between Damian Abel and returning Joshua Charles. And, Joshua, he'd been out of TWA for a couple months, and, he made his return and challenged the Demon to that 2 out of 3 falls match. And, I didn't see how the first fall occurred. Joshua did pick up the first fall. It was really crowded there last night, so I was constantly moving around just to make sure I wasn't in anyone's way. And then Damien delivered a devastating black hole slam. I mean, that is just an absolute devastating move that Damien delivers, and to pick up the second fall. And then the third fall, Dr. Smiles came up on the apron, trying to distract the ref. Joshua Charles delivered a super kick and had Damien beat, but the referee was distracted. And then, Joshua told the referee to turn around, and then got in Dr. Smiles' face and was scolding him. And then Damien tried to come from behind and attack Joshua Charles, but he missed. And then Joshua Charles, threw Damien into Dr. Smiles, knocking Dr. Smiles down off the apron, and rolled up Damien for the pin. And the bully Damien Abel was not happy after that. And, Dr. Smiles, he was favoring his midsection. So I doubt that things are over between Joshua Charles and Damien Abel. Then the next match was other Dead Cell member Vincent Cross taking on relatively newcomer Tsunami Tommy in a wipeout match. So what this was is, there was a kiddie pool in the ring full of a bunch of different weapons. They had squirt guns and, pretty much anything you would use to play with in the pool or whatever. And, so, I mean, these guys, there was even looked to be like a Charizard plushie in there. And, not Charizard, Squirtle, the blue Pokemon. And then, so, Tommy, he was beating Vincent Cross with pool noodles, and Vincent was just, it didn't faze him at all. And then Vincent, started choking Tsunami Tommy out with the pool noodle. And, these guys, and then there was this, one of those floater toys that you rub back and it shoots water. It wasn't a squirt gun. It was made out of foam. I don't know exactly what it's called. But, Vincent started beating Tommy with one of those. And then, Vincent eventually tried to go for a pile driver, which is an illegal move in TWA. And, Vane Lewis came out to scold him, said, "Hey, like, we don't hit that move here. Like, that's an illegal move and you know it." And then, so Vane and Vincent were drawing back and forth, and then eventually, Tommy hit what looked to be like a scorpion death drop onto Vincent Cross to get the win. So Tsunami Tommy picked up his first TWA victory. And then after that, Vincent was obviously upset and, was blaming Vane for costing him the match. And then, they were, jawing back and forth again. And eventually Vane Lewis said, "You know what? Like, my contract as TWA commissioner has come to an end, so I'm resigning as commissioner." And, before that, Vane, started to just go to the back, and then Vincent mentioned Vane's kids, which Vane charged the ring and said, "I'm resigning as commissioner, but I still have a couple matches left on my wrestler's contract." So, and then Vane challenged Vincent Cross to a body bag match. And Vincent, denied and went to the back, and, and Vane was calling him a coward. The fans were calling Vincent Cross a coward. So, but I'm sure that body bag match is going to happen. So, be on the lookout for that one, TWA fans, for sure. Then after intermission, we had a fatal four-way match between Cameron, Paul Bryant, Alexander Crowley, and all three of them were challenging Legacy Champion Big Rig to a fatal four-way match. So, Cameron and Crowley were wanting to go at each other, and then Paul Bryant and Big Rig were wanting to go at each other. So, these four men fought around the ring. It was kind of hard to keep up with the match because, there was so much action going on. And then eventually, Mr. Slamuel came out and, picked up Big Rig's crowbar that he brings to the ring with him. And Slamuel gave the thumbs up and then gave the thumbs down, and viciously assaulted Big Rig with that crowbar. So, Mr. Slamuel, years of being, in my opinion, one of the faces of TWA, has now turned his back on the TWA fans. So, I'm sure we'll get an explanation real soon from Mr. Slamuel on why he did what he did to his former tag team partner. And, I can't wait to hear that, and I know a lot of fans probably can't wait to hear that explanation either. And then, in the main event, the reason we were all here, to honor this man, the late, great Nate Thompson. Yesterday marked 2 years since he was tragically taken from us in a automobile accident. And every year at TWA Untamed, because that was the show that he won the TWA tag team titles, before his, and then 4 days later was his untimely passing. So every year at TWA Untamed, we honor our fallen brother, and it was definitely an emotional show for sure. And we had that battle royal, and Cage returned for one night only and came to the ring and delivered an emotional tribute to Nate Thompson. And and then all the boys got in the ring and had a battle royal, and over the top rope. Both feet touch the floor just like the Royal Rumble. And then eventually, Damian Abel delivered a World's Strongest Slam 2 cage to get the pinfall because the last 2 men in the ring, you could either be eliminated via pinfall or submission, or you could throw him over the top rope. So Damian was the winner of the, I think this is the second annual, or maybe third annual Battle Royal. And he got, one of Ryan James's mask that he wore to the ring, and a 3D printed trophy, which looked really nice. I actually got to hold the trophy, so it was pretty cool, to see that. I mean, guys, wrestling's a brotherhood. We go out, we try to our best to entertain you fans. We tell stories, but at the end of the day, it's all brotherhood and a sisterhood. I mean, I know there's a lot of those boys, that would have my back, and I hope they know that I would have theirs no matter what. And it's hard to lose a brother, especially someone as special as Nate Thompson. Like Cage said, you often talk about, how special someone is when they're gone, but see, with Nate, even when he was here, we talked about how special he was. No one had an unkind word to say about him. He just lit up everywhere he went and was just super, super nice to everyone. And I'm going to tell you guys a little story. So, you guys know that, I briefly did wrestling for a little bit. I was a manager. So, when I first started up at WVWE, now WVWF, I was just going as a fan because, Vincent Cross and, Ryan James were wrestling on that show, and it was 45 minutes away from me, and, I just wanted to go support a couple of my friends. And, it was Nate, the one that was messaging me, telling me about the venue, that it was handicapped, accessible, and where exactly it was in Parkersburg. So, Nate generously took time out of his day to, give me that information. So, I say without Nate Thompson, Corey Hot Wheels, CT Berry, whatever you want to call me. I went by a couple different names during that time, wouldn't have been born. So, Nate, brother, we love you. We miss you. And it's just not the same without you, buddy. But with that being said, guys, that's going to conclude my recap of TWA Untamed. Hope you guys enjoyed. As always, like, comment, and subscribe. My WrestleMania video got like over 100 views, so please, guys, let's shoot this one up. And let's help TWA, man. I mean, they're a great promotion. Let's help them get more followers and more fans in the building as well. So, I'll see you guys next time, and take care.